We're back. Here we go. We're talking about paradox and the importance and function of paradox in mythology. So, screen share. Here's where I am in the notes, right in the beginning. Masks, Transformation, and Paradox by A. David Napier. So, paradox, something seemingly absurd or contradictory that turns out to be true. It's when two things are true at the same time, right? And this, it helps to do a little etymology here. Paradoxon, 16th century, comes from contrary opinion. So in storytelling, the beauty of contrariness is inherent to discovery. That's a transgressive idea, right? It crosses boundaries of expectation and moral code of what's right or what makes sense, right? Mythology doesn't always make sense. It often also crosses taboos and crosses boundaries that are not supposed to be crossed by our culture. And that's part of what helps us discover and learn in and enjoy mythology, the contrary opinions inherent to the storytelling style. It comes from para, distinct, and doxa, opinion. So the origin tales and other types of cosmologies and cosmogonies, they present a distinct opinion of our culture and the ways we came here. And that's to be respected and honored in traditional forms of mythological storytelling. Self-contradictory, but in paradox, something's self-contradictory. So you can welcome that which doesn't make sense, that which is contradictory. And that's what helps us to see things in a new way. Paradox appears to be what it isn't, right? So to determine if something's paradoxical, Napier says, we have to determine paradoxical ideas, one may ask, are they antimonious or do they demand reconciliation of incompatible things? A lot of mythology invites absurdity into the mix. It invites the unexplainable into the story mix to ask us if the story is antimonious. This is an old alchemical word. You might see anti here, which means against, right? This meant two metals that would bounce against each other. In science, there's just something that won't mix, right? Something that's poisonous, something that's toxic that bounces off. Are the ideas antimonious? It's from the Byzantine. Or do they demand reconciliation of incompatible things? So Napier's talking about this in the context of Greek theater and tragedy, the beginnings of tragedy and comedy and the inventions of these genres in order to help humans learn how to recognize incompatible things and reconcile things that don't make sense in our minds. We're bringing that into mythology and the role of masks and personae in mythological tales, okay? That's where I'm going with all of this. Paradox leads us to perceive a contradiction. In other words, that the acceptance of ambiguity is fundamental to change, okay? Here's one of our main ideas here. The acceptance of ambiguity is fundamental to change. What is ambiguity? Take a minute to define it for yourself. Ambiguity is paradoxical. Ambiguity is sometimes when we don't know the answer to something. Something's ambiguous. We can't see the answer, but there's multiple answers in ambiguity very often. It's not either or, right? It could be either or, but it could also be and. It could be multiple things. And therefore, we can see the story over and over. We can hear the story over and over, and we see and hear new things in it each time. That's the performative living aspect of world myths, any world myth. And in here is where the narrative transformation can happen, right? If we can accept ambiguity, that we don't know the answers as human beings to everything in all the mysteries of the universe, then we can grow, then we can evolve, then we can join a community, then we can learn how to obey laws and codes and morals in our society, right? So ambiguity is really, really important, right? Paradox and ambiguity in storytelling and in life help us to see that the universal and the individual correlate, right? We're the same. Origin myths help us understand that we are both part of something that happened in the past, and we're all still part of the same thing. These stories connect us, right? We talked about the roles of community building in these stories last time a little bit, and this is inherent to what paradox teaches us as a technique in performativity and in narrative and any art, in any discipline really, okay? Now let's start, here we are on our notes. Here we have, let's see if I can, nope, I can highlight, but I can't draw, that's cool. Here we have paradox. We have a paradox here that happens very commonly in mythology, that we see absolute likeness in the characters in our myths and aspects of our landscapes, if they're origin tales about places that we relate to and see every day when we look outside. We see absolute likeness. It's equitable. It's referential. We have reference to the things in the story. They're concrete places and people that we know that are part of our communities. And at the same time, we see sameness with the self, right? We see in these other beings, in these places, a oneness, something that's innate, individual, and unique to us. And that paradox makes us feel included. That's the heart of inclusivity and the function of these tales, right? So seeing congruences between the universal and individual helps foster acceptance of what empirically is not. Oops. Oop. Where are we? Hold on. We see paradox through disguise, right? Think about tricksters. Think about somebody wearing a mask. Think about the ways we present ourselves and different personae that we have a classroom persona. We have a persona with our parents and our family members. We have personae as parents, the way we present ourselves to our children. And our partners, right? These could be seen as disguises. I'm not seeing disguise as a derogatory term here. I'm seeing it as a beautiful term in which you can bring different things to different situations because we're adaptable. Through disguise, we articulate problems of appearance in the context of change. So through illusion, we can understand paradox and ambiguity. right? By being tricked or by seeing something in a different light. Masks help us to indicate connections between illusions versus recognition and to build integrity, right? Masks are the personification of thoughts and play roles in creation, destruction, and life and death mythology, particularly. There are often characters, even if they're not like physically wearing masks, that have layers and personae, and they move through the world in a picaresque way, and different things happening to them, and they discover different things, right? And they're transforming as they go and learning and evolving. These are the masks. I'm not always talking about literal masks in this idea, okay? Let me get back to my screen sharing here. All right. Good, clear. We're moving on here to a very, very quick notes about polytheism and the idea of the Trinity, just because it's in here. And we see a lot of origin tales which are based on Trinity, a lot of the the original Slavic stories and indigenous peoples' pagan tales especially are based in Trinity ideas. And this comes from Christianity. Polytheism, a lot of us know this term. It's not only religious, but it's a distinct mode of thought and universal method of organization, right? We have, for example, we have reverence, we have lively. There's Ganesha. Ganesha just had a birthday a couple days ago. She is. So we have this iconography, these large databases of deities and animal hybrids and supernatural beings that create polytheistic pantheons of representation and symbolism in our cultures, right? So it helps us organize thoughts and define aspects of our cultures which we value, which we fear. And Trinity was invented to explain polytheism and hierarchy, right? Because if you have a triadic personae, 3, and you can think of some religions here like Christianity, which brings triadism into the mix, then you have 3 aspects of a deity which become one. And then that one becomes iconic and representative of multiple personae, okay? So Napier gets into the role of Trinity in theater, and we aren't going to go there, but you can read more about that if you want. There are 2 terms here which I'll put up on our board of interest, I think, for us in mythology, that he says that the role of theater and storytelling in ancient Greece was to rectify the Trinity, to explain the Trinity, to teach the Trinity. And it comes from, the Greek prosopon and personae are integral to ideas of Trinity and hierarchy of Trinity, right? I put these on our board because they are also integral to shamanism and the use of masks in personae, manifestation and figuration. And personae, one who plays a part or parts. Remember, in early theater, people play multiple parts, different personae. And we bring this term symbolically into our mix for our coursework in our readings, okay? And he says that the use of manifesting characterization and figure through personae produces revivification. In a lot of the sacred texts, in world religions, we have this as a theme. We want everlasting life, or we seek praise and revivification from from the gods above. We want to live again and again in the light of these gods. World myths and origin tales often have this as a theme. It's one of our primary themes in origin tales, right? The bringing of Earth, the invention of Earth, the origination of our peoples, and how they come to be alive again and again. How we came to be related to them. Okay, revivification. We move now into a summary of Gary Edson's texts about masks, okay? And when I think of masks, like I said before, I'm thinking of them very metaphorically here. Yes, we have masks in ceremony and in ritual across cultures, and this is what Edson talks about. But he's bringing larger themes to this, and talking about masks as couriers of myth. So that's where I want us to focus, okay? And I want us to think of masks as personae, right? That we use all the time, even if we don't do makeup, even if we don't dress up, even if I'm wearing my pajamas here, and, you know, instead of makeup and a shirt and a tie, professional attire, this is a mask, right? So let's put a few keys here up on the whiteboard. I'll go a little bit, I'll break this part into two sections. Break this part into two sections. So, just to get another definition into the mix, Edson calls ritual an enactment of cultural heritage, right? And he calls myth the verbalization of tradition. And masks are the couriers of myth. I think that's a handy term for us. Myth is the verbalization of tradition. I think that's okay. I think that's true in an anthropological sense. Myths, rituals, and ceremonies definitely verbalize tradition a lot of the time, right? I think it's a limited definition, but it's okay. And masks are couriers of myth. Now, when we think of couriers, they're carriers, right? They're people that deliver things. I think all the characters in Origin Tales, we'll be reading a lot of, and all of the characters, all of the supernatural beings and shamans and myth and ritual and ceremony are couriers. They're bringing messages from a different place, and they're creating a sense of overlay between the sacred and the mundane, right? So that's how we're thinking about couriers here. He says on pages 146, we'll go over this very quickly. This is pretty similar to what we saw in some of the other definitions. Myths provide practical rules for maintaining order, right? Like establishing civilization. They provide method of understandings for limits of power. They assess cultural traditions. They explain the world and natural forces. They composite, means they bring together. Stack, or like a rock, a sedimentary rock is composite, right? They composite hopes and fears that constitute our beliefs. For example, in the philosophy in parables, and narratives disclosing sacred worlds, right? They composite hopes and fears that constitute beliefs. I think that one's worth putting up here. We haven't seen that one before, okay? Myths. They composite hopes and fears Often those two are linked, right? That constitute our beliefs. Let's think about what that means for a minute. I would say maybe hit pause. This is a big idea that's important to reading and thinking about the beauty of these tales. That hopes and fears correlate. This is part of paradox in mythology. Hopes and fears correlate. We hope and we fear. We hope and we fear change all the time. We know change is the only constant, and we hope and fear it. That would be an example, right? A new level in a world arising after a flood. We're hoping there are conditions in the story that are dire, and we need something to happen in that story, right? But the flood is terrifying, and it produces a lot of fear before change can happen, right? And the survival of those trials and tribulations in mythology are the composition of our belief systems. They help us form our beliefs and our value systems in culture, okay? So take a break and take a few notes about that, perhaps. That would be a good discussion board point as far as examples from stories that you will be reading that bring hopes and fears into the mix, that help the culture constitute beliefs, right? And that's an example of paradox and ambiguity working its wonders on our experience of the world, right? And they offer sources of identity. This one's new too, so I'm putting this up. We've talked about how mythology brings individual identity into communal identity and universalism. Myths tell us who we are, where we came from, and they also function as mirrors. Masks are mirrors. Monsters are mirrors, right? Monsters show us what we fear in cultures. Masks show us what our beliefs are and what they make fun of our beliefs. They make our beliefs, they animate our beliefs, they exaggerate our beliefs, right? And they offer sources of identity through that, and they make us be more conscientious about our belief systems and our experience. Masks are acknowledgement of a sacred world without explaining that world, right? So sacred world remains unexplained in mythology. In our original conversation last week, we talked about all the non sequiturs and absurdism in mythology, and that it brings a lot of humor. A lot of the time, I'm just thinking, what? After you read something, what does that mean, right? The sacred world doesn't require explanation. It just is. It remains unexplained, right? And that's ambiguous. That's paradox. These are all examples of paradox in storytelling, right? So now we're jumping back to the handout. Origin myths. We'll be reading, if you haven't already started, a lot of origin myths this semester. Origin myths, says Edson, detail in symbolic terms, conditions and circumstances. Yes, they know origin tales help people gain control and mystical power. Because people often want narrative order, and we want to make sense of things so we can have a sense of control over our lives and have a sense of peace in our universe, that it's not chaotic, right? And origin myths, very importantly, establish sacred time and convictions rather than actual evidence, okay? They establish a sacred time. What is that? Let's think about that and put that term up on our board in a new color. Maybe some of you would like to write a midterm paper about what examples of sacred time we see in world mythology. Sacred time is paradoxical, right? Sacred time is both timeless and highly specific. Most myths happen in a concrete way. There's a set of characters, there's a setting. It's timeless. Sacred time is timeless, and therefore it's past, present, and future. And it's specific and exact. For example, this is when the beginning of the world happened, and here's how it happened, right? What is sacred time? It's one of our main themes. Keep an eye out for it as you read. I'm going to summarize some of this, and you can look through my notes for the sake of time. I'm going to go for maybe 5 more minutes right here, then I'll take a break and a stretch, ask you a question, and then do a part 3 and tie it up. And the part 3 will be shorter, probably 10, we'll keep it at 10 or 15 minutes so that the total seminar is about 45 as we're going before, 10 minutes then. So in terms of inventing sacred time, Edson says that an essential role of myth was, he uses the past tense, I disagree with that, so I'm going to just change it. An essential role of myth is making an event or situation appear to be factual, making it special and separate from daily activities, okay? So sacred time, let's add a layer into our definition here. Sacred time is timeless and specific in terms of time, but it's also special and separate, right? It's timeless, it's special and separate, but it's also exacting. It also chronicles daily activities or daily experience of some supernatural beings a very long time ago, for example. Sacred time is both. It's paradoxical, right? It's paradoxical. Let's take a stretch, and I want you to take some notes and reflect upon this idea of sacred time and how things are both. Things are 2, things are 3, things are ambiguous in origin tales and world mythology, and that how that produces meaning and discovery in the reading of the tales and in the listening, if you were experiencing them through music or performativity in a live setting. Take a few minutes, jot some ideas down about that, stretch, go get a cup of coffee, go say hi to someone, take a walk outside and mull it all over, and then come back and watch part 3, all right? And we'll tie it up. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.